issues around participation, challenges, governance, engagement, compliance, and areas for the future. We're then going to move on to a focus on greener care, where we have Elaine Mead, who's the chair of the Greener Care Special Interest Group, and Lorna Turner, sustainability lead for the Devon Care Home Collective. So they're also from the Institute for Health and Social Care Management, who run a greener care group, and we're obviously trying to work together wherever we can around these agendas. And then finally, from a presentation point of view, we have Joanne Barmer, who's the CEO of Oakland Care, who are leading the way towards a much more sustainable future in care. And I'll give a little bit more detail about these additional speakers as we move towards them. But just to give you a bit of the structure of that, then around about 3:30, we'll have a good opportunity for some detailed discussion and questions. So as Lisa said, please do put questions that occur to you as we're going along into the Q&A, and we'll pose as many of them as we can to our fascinating speakers. But first of all, over to you, Laurie, to give us a bit of background into the work that you've uncovered by surveying MCF members. Thanks.
Hi everybody, thanks Vic for that introduction. Let me just work out how to share my screen. Lisa, it says I'm a disabled participant.
So I think, yeah, while we're working on that, so just Laurie, do you want to give a few sort of headlines of the number of people that of the survey? It should be working.
Here
now,
we go.
please.
Sorry,
Great.
Sorry about that. Just get that working now.
Oh, perfect. Here we go.
Can we see that?
I can see
Brilliant.
it. That's in. Yeah. Now you're in sharing.
Fantastic. Mode. Okay. So hi, yeah, sorry about that. So we wanted to do this survey to get a better understanding of our membership and the general state of play, so that we could better support members in their sustainability journeys, and also identify pockets of good practice and specific challenges so that we could share those across the sector. We had 46 responses after we cleaned up the data, which represents about a quarter of our membership. So it's a broadly representative sample. It's a good spread across different sizes of organisations, ranging from multinational enterprises to singular care homes. And all providers ran more than one type of service. Next time, we'd like to extend the capabilities of the survey so that we're able to differentiate better between answers from different kinds of services, so that we can identify specific challenges within care home environments versus nursing homes, within home care, sorry, and so on. First, we asked respondents to choose the 3 main challenges and barriers that their organisations were facing to improving their environmental sustainability. The options were a result of our in-person event in November, where we had an open-ended discussion on the topic. So all of these options have been suggested by members at one point or another. Maybe unsurprisingly, the most frequently selected answer for this question was cost and lack of resources. We think this is due to chronic underfunding across the sector and multiple competing priorities. There just isn't a great deal of money in the pot specifically for environmental sustainability. The results generally match what we heard from members in our event and in other feedback sessions we've had. They say they lacked the internal expertise to know where to start. There's a significant time investment and a budget involved with upskilling internally. And also the building stock across the sector is presenting huge challenges. Many buildings across the care sector are very old, which makes them not only expensive, but also complicated to modernise, and also legal challenges can present themselves, as many of these buildings are listed, which can make simple things like installing double glazing almost impossible. Some comments from members here. An extension on the point of funding challenges. A lot of members have mentioned that there's a lack of cooperation from local commissioners, and fees don't currently take into account any additional costs which result from decarbonising efforts. One of the things that was apparent throughout all the responses in the survey is the ambition and the drive is there, and there's often widespread support for actions, despite sometimes not feeling able to, you know. So we did some questions about actions that organizations had taken at that strategic level. 72% said that their organization has a staff member leading on environmental sustainability, which suggests that a good number of organizations do see it as a priority and are trying to dedicate resources to it. Around 54% demonstrated that commitment by producing a public environmental, social governance or sustainability report or something similar. And we thought a surprisingly high amount at 60% have an ambition to reach net zero. We also thought a surprisingly high number of respondents answered that their organisation knows what their annual carbon emissions are. The accuracy of this will vary hugely, I'd imagine, but it's encouraging that so many organisations have made an effort to establish that baseline. And off the back of that, just under half said that their organisation had started to implement a strategy to reduce emissions. Considering that those who responded to this survey are more likely to be engaged with the topic already, the answers do suggest that a lot of social care providers currently don't have any kind of strategy in place for decarbonising or reaching net zero in line with the national commitment to be net zero by 2050. That said, not having a strategy in place doesn't necessarily mean that organisations aren't doing anything. Later on in the survey, we asked some specific questions about what kind of actions providers were implementing to reduce their environmental impact. And these charts show the total number of actions that were implemented by organisations without a strategy and organisations with a strategy. And you can see that in some areas like travel and transport and energy, it's very similar. And in other cases, such as supply chain, it was quite different. In areas that it's similar, it might be because there are different drivers at play. So the cost of living crisis will have incentivized a lot of providers to improve energy efficiency and things like that to save money on their energy bills, which will have inadvertently have reduced their environmental impact as well. And maybe only organisations who have a strategy in place would be as aware of the impact of their the emissions of their supply chain, which would mean they're more motivated to make changes here. Here are some other measures that providers have put in place. Nothing too surprising, aside from the fact that only 12 said that they had risk assessments in place for climate-driven risks such as adverse weather. This is not a direct indication of a lack of preparedness for adverse weather per se. The plans might be included in other documents like a business continuity plan, for example, but we've identified it as an area that we need to explore further. We wanted to ask our membership about engagement across the organisation because many members who've been making significant progress in the area and have been more involved with our work have stressed the importance of bringing everybody along with them on the journey. So a good number of our members said that they had engaged with the workforce, but very few said that they'd engaged with the people they support or with their relatives. The quality of the engagement was also variable. When respondents expanded on their answers, it ranged from a poster on the wall in the staff room to implementing a focus group or having green champions and reward systems in place. There were some really interesting expanded answers in terms of how organisations have been interacting with their staff and with the people who are drawing on care and support. I'm going to skip past these because they're quite long at the moment, but if anybody wants me to share these slides with them, and if anybody wants me to share further insights with the survey, please feel free to get in touch after the session. I'm more than happy to do that because they are really useful to draw from. We then explored some of the drivers for improving in environmental sustainability. And we found that regulation is quite an effective driver for change in a lot of cases. So these are some of the schemes and legislation that organisations in the social care sector had to comply with. And we found that 71% of organisations who had to comply with the energy savings opportunity scheme or something similar had implemented a carbon reduction strategy, compared with 31% of organisations who weren't required to comply with any of these. We then asked for some examples of resources and funding that had been accessed by members. And again, we had some really interesting insights that I'm happy to share, maybe after this session. And after compiling the insights from the survey with discussions that we've had across the membership and with other wider alliances, we've identified a few focus areas that we think need to be developed across the sector. We need a better understanding of the costs that are involved with sustainable development, and we need to identify the gaps in government guidance and in public funding for these. We'd like to support organisations to better engage with their staff and with people who are drawing on care and support, encouraging co-development of solutions that work for everybody. And we'd like to identify some trusted expertise in retrofitting and the built environment to help overcome the conflicting advice that providers are dealing with at the moment. We'd like to build a better understanding of climate-driven risk, how to prepare and how to engage with local authorities and local communities better on this, and generally gather and create resources to help providers learn about the practical steps that they can take to move forward on the journey and think about creating a strategy to move forward, which hopefully the rest of this discussion will prove really useful for providers. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Vic for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Laurie. That's really fantastic to get those insights. And when we come on to the discussion later on, it'd be great to hear from people whether those are the things that are high on their mind, and particularly those areas that Laurie identified would be really valuable for the future. So thank you for that. And do, as I mentioned, and Lisa did as well, put any initial questions that you have into the chat, and as Laurie says, we're happy to share those resources and slides following this session. So moving us on now, I mentioned that we have two fantastic speakers coming next who are part of the Institute for Health and Social Care Management. In fact, we have Elaine Mead, who's the chair of the Greener Care Special Interest Group, part of the Institute of Health and Social Care Management. Elaine's background is in clinical senior management and board level within the NHS. She now works independently as the leadership faculty for the Institute of Healthcare Improvement and the lead European faculty for Catalyst. She speaks internationally on the impacts of healthcare on climate change, and she's currently a PhD candidate for the University College Dublin, researching quality improvement and sustainable healthcare. So that's fantastic. Welcome to you, Elaine. And she's joined by Lorna Turner, who is the sustainability lead for the Devon Care Home Collaborative. She's a former care home provider herself, had a 30-bed residential home, and she's completed a Master's in Sustainable Development from SOAS. So I think you'll agree, some fantastic speakers who can give us a little bit of insight into the work that they have been involved in. Particularly, I think some of the insight into where there has been work within the health service and in care homes, which we can draw on and learn from as we take forward some of those very pertinent challenges that Laurie has identified. So over to you too. I believe you've got some slides to share, and you're presenting this as a bit of a double act, so we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vic, thank you for that introduction. And yes, just for those who don't know the Institute of Health and Social Care Management, it's an independent management membership organisation, and the Greener Care Group is open to all, whether you're a member or not. So we meet quarterly. We're next meeting for the Greener Care Conference on the 7th of June at 2 o'clock. So in the spirit of sharing, we'd be delighted to see any of you join us on the 7th of June. But we have a few slides just to share with you, and we are going to do it as a double act. So I'm delighted to be here today with my friend and colleague Lorna, who's going to pick up on some of these areas. But if I just start, because we wanted to give you some context for this conversation, I think it's always important that we realise why we're doing this. So on the first slide, Lorna, thanks, is just this really quite dramatic graph that shows it's getting hotter. Now, it's been getting significantly hotter since the Industrial Revolution, as we know, where we've had an increased reliance on fossil fuels, cars, planes, emissions from making actually the stuff that we use every day, have all contributed to that now triple planetary crisis, not just of carbon emissions that we're seeing here, but also of pollution and a negative impact on biodiversity. So actually we're looking to move towards a healthy planet and of course have healthy people, and that fundamentally is what the healthcare system's here to do. But although it's getting hotter, I have to tell you that on February the 24th, the threshold of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average was breached for the first time for a full 12 months. Now, that's a really difficult thing for us to have to deal with. What it says to me is we need to do more and we need to do it faster. This is impacting now, not just in other countries, but here in the UK. Last year, over 2,800 people over 65 died in the 2022 heat waves. And we also see actually health harm coming from some of the air pollution. Ella Deborah Christie was a 9-year-old who actually was the first person to have on her death certificate a death registered due to air pollution. She happened to live very close to the South Circular in London, in Lewisham, and actually died from her asthma. So it's happening here. But Lorna, tell us a bit more.
My slides won't. I don't know if you can still hear me, but I seem to, the slides are stuck.
We can hear you, Lorna.
I'm going to just turn off my video and see if that helps.
Try clicking on the slide and then clicking again.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
So yeah, as Elaine was saying, so it's very much here in the UK. What that really means in terms of climate, as we've experienced this winter, it's warmer and much wetter winter. And that has an impact in terms of our care businesses, because so you'll have picked up probably in the media talking about the forecast of rising prices on foods come the autumn. So it isn't just actually about you know, the weather itself, it's actually what do the knock-on effects mean. Potentially that increase in frequency of extreme events. So whether we have a very hot heat wave in the summer, or whether we are having flooding during the winter. That loss of biodiversity that Elaine mentioned as one of the other kind of planetary crises. Well, there are things that are now coming in, legislation. So if you're doing a new development, for example, for your care home, say you're part of a group and you've got a new site, you will now have to comply with biodiversity net gain. So any development must demonstrate a minimum of a 10% uplift for biodiversity, which is a process of trying to reverse the decline. But most importantly is really around the risks to health. And that's both the direct and indirect.
Thanks, Lorna. And so from a healthcare perspective, we are going to have to deal with the health impacts of climate change, but ironically, we're causing some of those as well. Now, you've heard about some of them already, but things like Lyme disease from ticks is going to be even more likely to happen. I live up in the Highlands of Scotland. It's something we're very alert to here, but more cardiac events, more asthma, an impact on the quality of our water are all things that we'll be looking at as impacts on human health. Now, there are UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll see health only really features on one of them there under number 3. But we actually contribute to all 17 of these sustainability goals. On the next slide, I've got another graph to show you, which is how are we going to get to this net zero? What are we going to try and do? And although there are national targets, we're really struggling to get there. It shows the magnitude of the change needed for us to get to net zero, and we're actually going to have a problem. We're going to need to make significant changes, every one of us, to change tack. Lastly, then, I wanted to show you that although healthcare actually contributes 40% of public sector emissions, 4% on its own, it's not just what we do, it's what we get other people to do on our behalf in healthcare. 62%, the blue bit on this circle here, of our emissions come from the supply chain, the services to our business. So although we can do some things within healthcare to make a change, it tells us that we need to now do whatever we can to work with manufacturers and suppliers to actually reduce some of the carbon emissions. So over to you again, Lorna.
And picking up when Laurie was saying about 50% of the respondents to the survey had looked at their carbon footprint. I think this is an area which is quite challenging for a lot of providers. So measuring your carbon footprint, there are some free tools out there. You don't actually have to bring in a consultant at an exorbitant cost. So if you were starting, you might look at, say, the Carbon Trust tool. Now, ignore the jargony bit, I'll go on to that later, but they look at a slightly narrower scope for small businesses, which is really around your energy use. The SME Climate Hub tool, there are links in these slides, so if we end up sharing slides, that will take you directly through to their free tool. Now, it's actually a bit wider scope, so it actually looks at what Elaine was touching on in terms of the supply chain as well. And generally what we look at is that more than 70% of your emissions are likely to be in your supply chain. There are lots of other tools coming on the market. So NatWest has recently launched a tool that is, cleverly kind of links to, it's only Sage Accounting at the moment, but that automated functionality helps pull some of your data out. So it sounds quite complicated, but in fact, those tools on here, Carbon Trust and SME Climate, when you work through them, they do take you step by step. What you will need to do is just work out, okay, what am I going to do? If I'm a group, am I going to start with one home? And what is the time period that I'm looking at? So you'll need to scope it yourself. And yes, it does take a bit of capacity, and there may be some funding required, but not necessarily to do this bit of it, to measure your baseline. One of the projects that Elaine and I are working on, it actually pulls from the NHS or from the health service sector, because there's a carbon footprint tool that's been developed for GP practices. So what we're hoping to do is actually create the equivalent for care homes so that the language is right, that you don't get that slightly clunky approach of being asked about your warehouses or things that are totally irrelevant to the sector. And it's a much more straightforward, easy to understand front end of the tool. So funding permitting. A bit of jargon, bear with me. So the tools talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. What you really need to take from this slide. Scope 1 is basically what they call direct emissions. In care home world, it's really around your use probably of gas. If you've got vehicles within the company, that's your scope 1. Scope 2, you bring in energy for your heating and your cooling. And scope 3 is really that supply chain. If you were selling goods on as well in part of your care organisation, that would also come under scope 3. This slide is really just highlighting, we look to the health sector for some case studies, ways of learning that we can bring in to care homes. You know, this slide shows you there's some huge similarities. You know, we're asset based, we're buildings based, we've got staff, we provide care, we've got beds, we've food, laundry, lots of similarities to it, but there's also some differences. So yes, we want to learn, but these differences sometimes do make actually the speed of progress harder, because we're managed locally, we're a fragmented sector, 80% of the sector is single home providers, you know, so and our accountability is also different. You know, yes, we're both subject to that external scrutiny of CQC, but we're called to account slightly different ways. So NHS more to government, and for care homes, it's more about your customers, clients, family members. Talking of CQC, you'll probably be aware. So now we have this environmental sustainability quality statement. And on the Skills for Care website, it's got a video, it's got some case studies as well. But the quality statement, which is not being assessed this year for care homes under the single assessment framework, but as you can see on the screen, it's understanding the negative impact on the environment and how we are striving to make that positive contribution and reducing it. So it's quite strongly geared about reducing our carbon. And over to you, Elaine.
Thanks, Lorna. And I think that causes quite a lot of people anxiety, Lorna, both in health and care, when they see quality statements like that and what are we going to have to do, and it tends to redirect people's focus. So I thought this might be helpful just to share. It's research which describes the elements that they're suggesting that we need to move to have a green healthcare system. And again, there are some similarities here, but lots of issues around the leadership. We all have chemicals, whether those are chemicals that we're using with and on patients or chemicals to clean. There is waste that we need to dispose of. But interestingly, as you move through this list, if you could just click to the next slide, Lorna, you can see that actually if we just changed a couple of words, it's the same for both the health system and the care system. And actually, a lot of these things are parallel. And that means, for me anyway, we really need to work very closely together and learn from each other rather than doing things separately, independently, and all having to relearn the things that we've already done. So there are some issues for us about how we manage our pharmaceuticals, and we are aware that there are drugs being given in care homes, in nursing homes, for example. And we've already heard today about the issues and the costs to do with refurbishing buildings. Some of the oldest buildings we had were in healthcare. So I think the research stands up, whether it's a green healthcare system or a green care system. We need to look really together at how we're going to come up with some of these solutions. Thanks, Lorna.
And these drivers are actually increasing our need to look at this quickly. So there, as I mentioned, so the legislation that came in about biodiversity net gain, that's actually for new care developments, but also we've got food waste legislation coming in. So that came in Wales 1st of April this year, but hasn't come in England yet. And that is where some of our local authorities still combine it. So my area, Mid Devon, food waste is still collected with general waste, and that's going to have to be separated by March 2026. So there's a legislation as a driver. We've talked about CQC as a driver, but we've also got, if you like, the market drivers. So, you know, family members are increasingly more aware of actually looking for green credentials. Staff, perhaps my own experience is maybe not at care staff level, but in a larger organisation where you've got more of a senior management team, actually staff are perhaps not as driven to being positioned locally and working on a very local basis, but they'll choose to where they work by their credentials. Does this organisation have the right credentials? Does it sit with my values? Financial resources as well. So in our area, there is funding for decarbonisation in part of Devon, not all of Devon. And I know it's patchy across the country, but some of those grants, you have to have demonstrated a decarbonisation plan. You have to actually have done a carbon footprint tool. And increasingly within the finance sector, you're looking at ESG funding. So investors are starting to question, what are the eco credentials? What are the environmental credentials of this thing that I'm investing in? And lastly, contractual obligations. So on the local authority side, and I can speak from our local authority in Devon, so we're in conversation with Devon County Council. It's not in place yet. It is in their strategy document. The care sector is recognised as one of the high emitters, but actually we're sitting behind sort of some of the construction work and some of the other big sectors, but it will come into place where it will be built into the contracts. And perhaps, Elaine, if I could just ask you to talk on the NHS side on the contract.
Yeah, so I was listening just this morning that as I've described, they're looking already at our suppliers and trying now to bring them in to have commitment to green agenda. They soon will not be able to even bid for a contract in the NHS if they can't prove those green credentials. So I think it's tightening, Lorna, and I think that's going to increasingly make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can we do? This page is actually taken from, it's called the Greener Care Guide. It's on the Devon Care Home Collaborative website. It's free, it's a PDF, feel free to have a look at it. And it's highlighting and trying to bring everybody, every size of organisation along with even if we just start with small actions, but let's start. And the sections in the guide is covered. So you've got a building section, an energy section, etc. And there are simple steps to each section, which are generally no or low cost. So, you know, some of the straightforward ones we know, you know, energy, LED light bulbs. And sometimes it's about actually just revisiting something and actually saying, did we really do all the light bulbs? Or looking at motion sensor bulbs. In my own care home, we put in motion sensor bulbs just in cupboards where invariably people went in and forgot to switch a light off. A store cupboard in the kitchen was, you know, so there are places where you can use motion sensor bulbs. So there are small steps you can take within each of these areas, but there's also then perhaps the larger ones, which we touched on, you know, the retrofitting of buildings, which will need to be planned in, but will be much more of an investment with a longer payback period. It is really probably starting about energy use and planning in about buildings in the longer term. So just to summarise, hopefully what Elaine and I have talked through is actually some of the similarities between health and care and some of those low cost things that you can do and we can learn from the health sector. In terms of the staff engagement, actually one thing I should have mentioned on that Greener Care Guide, there's a section around engaging with staff. It is really important. How you do it is the culture of your organisation. So for us, it was using a combination of staff meetings, the annual staff survey, and just some simple things about how important is it to them, what ideas do they bring, and naturally, you know, some green champions came forward. They were enthusiastic and they were actually more knowledgeable than I actually had perhaps expected. So I think that using that enthusiasm and desire for change was really impactful. And I think Elaine and I will both say this is all about taking action. It's not just about trying to come up with a strategy document and the policy. It's about, even if it's small, act now.
Thanks, Lorna.
So shall I stop sharing there?
Thank you both. That was an incredible journey through some of the very practical things that people could do, but also reflecting, and I can see it's already coming up in the discussion, some of the kind of differences between the focus of this within the NHS and the longer term focus, but also how rapidly things like contractual obligations are going to appear. And I think that's particularly interesting to think about in the relationship between the NHS and care provision. And, you know, and I know Laurie and colleagues have been busy trying to push to properly understand how social care is going to be viewed through that net zero supply chain perspective. But yeah, very interesting to see that, and how local authorities perhaps are beginning to bring that through, and the focus around regulation. But great to see some of the very practical things. And I know there's some commentary in the chat, we'll pick that up as well, about how much can be applied across the home care settings as well as care homes. And I know, you know, NHS is not a shorthand just for hospitals. So I know that there is work being done in community services as well, that maybe we can unpick a little bit again to see if there's learning there when we get to the Q&A section. So I'm delighted now to move us on to Joanne, who is joining us from a rather more tricky journey than she'd hoped for, so still en route somewhere.
I'm not driving though, I am pulled over now.
Good. So Joanne, we're really thrilled to have you with us. So Joanne Balmer is the CEO of Oakland Care. They are the first carbon neutral care group. They are a residential care provider. They are Green Mark certified at level 3, and they are also apologies if I get this slightly wrong, Joanne, no doubt you'll correct me, but it's I think it's gold level of the Green World Award, and that makes them the only healthcare provider to achieve that level in the world. So we're absolutely thrilled that you can join us, and I think Laurie is going to show your slides for you, and we'll work through that, and then we'll move on to questions after you. Thanks very much.
Okay.
There we go. Can you see that, Joanne? I think I'm sharing slides now.
You are, but I can't hear Joanne. She sounded like she was just about breaking up.
Oh,
Joanne,
there we go.
we can't hear
Could share
you.
your screen, Laurie, thank you.
We can see that now, Joanne.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and we can see the first slide.
Can you hear me okay?
First time we did, second time you're a bit more Dalek-like.
You can't hear me.
No,
Maybe try turning your video off, Joanne, if it isn't already.
any good? Would you try again? No, we're not hearing you at all now. So what I would suggest is, if you were able to, Joanne, whether you might be able to move a little and see if you can get a better signal, and we can pick up some of the QA questions while you do that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So if we can stop sharing for a second, Laurie, go back to the panel, and I'm going to pose some of the questions that we've got to Lorna and Elaine, if that's okay.
No problem. I've
And then
been
we'll
having
see
a
if we can get Joanne. Oh, she's gone altogether, has she? Right. Okay. We'll see if we can get her back, but maybe somebody could have a chat with her on the phone first to test the signal. Right. Okay. So there's quite a few questions in here. The first one really related, and I think you might have covered this a little bit in the slides, but was about the health emergency impacts that we need to be alert to. And I think you talked a bit about the health risks side of things. I think it would be useful, I guess, to understand if there's a more kind of strategic approach towards that you're seeing. So if you are in the kind of strategies that we're imagining that providers might need to be developing, whether they'll be seeing that as an environmental challenge, or as a kind of, or the risk will be sitting somewhere else within people's strategies. I don't know if you've got some thoughts on that, or Lorna, how you might have approached that within your care setting.
I might start, Lorna, because you and I have talked a lot about the impact of heat on vulnerable adults. I did allude to that, Vic, and I think
yes.
It's something we really do need to be thoughtful of. Certainly hospitals are not fantastically air-cooled environments. So we're already seeing on the wards that people are using, iced flannels and fans, but actually we're now seeing some of the evidence is once you start getting to these high temperatures, they're not very effective cooling mechanisms. So in hospitals, we're concerned about that. I think, Lorna, you're also concerned in care home settings, as an example. I will come to domiciliary care. I see another
Yes, of course,
question about that in a moment, but just because Lorna's in care homes. Oh, you're on mute, Lorna. Cool.
Should have learned that by now. So we have, we had so it was a heat wave policy, what to do. We had it was an old building, very typical for, I think over 60% of the estate in Devon are old buildings. So there's the basics that you can do with fans, drawing curtains. But interestingly, you can have a policy in place, but there was a pilot done in London, some research from UK Climate Resilience, which was using shuttering on windows. Now that would be a longer term and it would require an investment, but it could be something that is a retrofit at not a huge expense. Because alternatively, you're looking at things like aircon systems, which are actually then damaging the environment.
Yes.
So shall I pick up on the domiciliary care, Vic?
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
please, that would be great.
Great, because I think there are a few issues. We did have responsibility in Highland for some of the domiciliary care as well. So actually, and it's mentioned in some of the Q&As, the sorts of things you can do, again, are very practical. Questioning the use of PPE, the aprons and gloves that we regularly use on visits. So unless we're going to be seeing patients or clients where there are bodily fluids, then there's questions now about whether we do need to use all of the PPE that we've been used to using. There's another question I can see in the Q&A then about how do we dispose of it, and certainly COVID has caused us all sorts of ways to rethink how we use PPE, how we dispose of it, and there are people that will pick up and take some of the PPE if it's not hazardous waste. But the first thing in any of the work that we're doing is to question whether we need to do it in the first place. If we buy it or we have it, we then have the problem of getting rid of it. And I think that's a fundamental for everybody to get their heads around.
Mm.
Also in domiciliary care, we covered a huge patch in the Highlands, but we were still able to use electric cars. So we did have to move over to from the community services that we're providing to electric cars, for example. But practical things like, and I know you did this in the care homes, Lorna, using cleaning products that were without chemicals, both personal ones, but also cleaning for the actual surfaces and things.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of change, I think, in the sort of manufacturing of chemicals, and there are now quite a lot of suppliers that actually have eco-friendly ranges. So there was a particular product that we used, which in fact was literally water and salt that you hydrolyze, and it's a little unit that you buy, and it works brilliantly as a it's effectively a weak bleach, but it is totally acceptable within a care environment, and it wouldn't matter if you ingested it. So there are things that it's just pulling together that information and disseminating that information across the sector that is quite a challenge, because a lot of people have some great things, and if we manage to get Joanne on, I'm sure she will have many things that she will, top tips that it would just be great to be able to pull together.
Yes, well, talking of which, we are just about to get Joanne back on, which is great. But just before we leave the subject of supplies in that context, hooray! Give me one moment, Joanne, and we'll just come on to you then. The question, one of the things that comes back to Laurie quite often is, how do people know when there's a claim that something's eco-friendly, that it really is? That's something that members are asking a lot about.
Yeah, that's a hard one, isn't it, Lorna? I would say, because we have lots of companies have now, if you like, bit of greenwashing, want to sell their products, tell everybody everything's fantastic. There are some registered organisations that can look for you and see whether these companies are legitimate in their claims, but I think that's going to need to be tightened up more and more now as more things are appearing. But we're also becoming aware of things. In the chat I saw, Vic, that somebody had said we need to take the polyester out of the uniforms. We just didn't think of some of those things. No. Frankly, I didn't know that there were plastics in most tea bags until recently. So I think the more we're alert to these things, the more then we'll put the pressure on the manufacturers to have to not only change, but actually declare exactly what they're doing. And we'll get them to declare if we ask them the questions.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come back to cost, I've no doubt, because these things generally attract a premium. Joanne, while we've got you, thank you very much for coming back in. Can I just test we can hear you all right now?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Perfect, great. Laurie, we'll go again then. So Laurie's going to put your slides up. Hopefully you can see them. If not, she can say I'm on slide one.
I can't see them, but I've got a local copy, so I can work from that. That's okay. Fabulous. I can't believe my signal held out all the way down the motorway, and then I park up to do the call, and it goes off right at that moment.
I can believe it. These things happen, but you're here. That's the main thing. Great. Over to you.
Okay. So, Laurie, if you can just confirm when the rest of the participants can see the slides, because I'm on the phone now rather than the Zoom app.
Yeah, I think everyone else can see the first slide, leading the way to a more sustainable future in care.
Perfect. So if you flick onto the first content slide. So just to give you all some background as to our organisation at Oaken Care, we are a care home operator. We're an end-to-end developer, which means that we grow the business by identifying land, buying land and developing on that land, and then operating those homes ourselves. We very much focus on the private pay market, primarily in the southeast of England, and we provide a range of services including residential nursing and dementia care. One of the things I hope that the attendees today will take away from my slot and the content that I have to share with people is to dispel the current myth or perception that cost and resources is the biggest barrier to implementing changes in sustainability. Because I hope that what people will hear from me and understand is that the greatest impact of the changes that our organisation has done has not been as a result of significant financial investment. It's more around what you can do within your culture and your teams. So if you can flick over, Laurie, to the next slide. It says introduction at the top.
Yeah.
It says that Oakland Care are 3 years into the journey of sustainable working. We're probably into year 4 now, I think. We must be, yeah. And as I alluded to, we made both small but also significant changes during those last few years, and very much pride ourselves on delivering a sustainability strategy with the certifications and recognition to match. So if you move through to the next slide, Laurie, and you can click through the bullet points to bring it all up on screen. It really touches to you on why we want to become more sustainable as a care operator. Firstly, you've got the UN sustainability goals that were alluded to earlier in the webinar, and for us it's specifically 12 and 13 that are big focus areas for us. We all know that it's the right thing to do for the planet and the environment. And also alluded to is the fact that team members, residents and visitors expect it. And I cannot stress enough how much those stakeholders are invested in our business and what we're doing, and do hold us to account and seek to validate the changes that we're making. By making sustainable changes, there are wider business benefits. So obviously there can be financial benefits, better team morale and engagement, and obviously PR. We have advanced preparation for when sustainability auditing becomes mandatory, and I don't see that being very far away. You know, again, earlier it's already been referred to around the scrutiny that care providers, whether that's in homes or domiciliary care, will be subject to both from the CQC as well as local authorities. And for those larger organisations, as Laurie mentioned, there is the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme that's a regulatory requirement to report on. So as soon as businesses get to around the size that Oakland is now, you do usually become eligible that you have to report on that as well. There is the potential for sustainability-linked finance options for groups that are looking to invest. Certainly all of our current debt with the bank is now classed as a green loan. And by them recognising the changes that we have made, and by designating our debt as a green loan, it means that we benefit from reduced interest rates, which in today's economic climate is quite a rarity. So there are returns on the investments that you make. Possible improved returns for shareholders, very much an unknown quantity at this stage until there is a larger transaction of a sustainable organisation and care, but that's certainly something that's on the cards. So what does it really mean for us in public? On the next slide, Laurie. So day to day, we're looking at what changes we can make to impacting on the local environment. Again, it was mentioned earlier around biodiversity net gain. We have a big focus on that, and all of our homes have biodiversity gardens. In fact, all of our new developments have a minimum of 25, and ordinarily 30 to 35% of the outside space will be designated to biodiversity projects. Focusing on noise and odour pollution and local volunteering. Supply chain's been mentioned a few times, both buying sustainable products, so the chemicals that were mentioned that are hazardous component free, that's something we've done for many years now. Implementation of electronic devices and electronic systems wherever possible to reduce the paper usage, and consolidated deliveries. One of the things that we've really focused hard on is making sure that we don't have unnecessary deliveries coming to the care homes. Certainly, it's all too easy in today's day and age, as we probably know from our own lives at home, to do multiple quick orders throughout the week on Amazon and other platforms. And so, you know, it very quickly you can have a lot of delivery miles in your supply chain that are outside your normal delivery schedules of large items like food, or care supplies, but actually are contributing a lot to the emissions within that home. And so it's important for us to make sure that we reduce those deliveries coming to the homes. Cycle to work, I think, is something that's been around a long time. And I would say a couple of years ago, if I'm honest, we considered scrapping our cycle to work scheme because we weren't really getting a lot of interest in applications. And we wanted to see if we could invest our reward and retention money for staff in a different way. That said, we've just opened a scheme again for 2024 and already had 55 applicants. So I think it is something that's perhaps regained the interest of a lot of people. And things that we're all used to around car sharing and video calls. Utility use is an interesting one, and motion lights has been mentioned on the call. Obviously the use of LED lighting, thermostats, use of greener tariffs, but also we're trialling some new technology which allows us to monitor utilities on an individual room basis. And what that means is that we can set thresholds, a bit like when you've got your smart meter at home. We can set thresholds for how much electric and gas we expect each individual room to be using at different times of the day. So for example, you would expect the kitchen or a laundry room to stop using as much high electricity after the hours of around 6:30. And therefore, if the actual usage at that real life time is higher than the perimeters you've set, you will get an alert. And that means that you can go and look at as to why that might be. And it could be, for example, that the laundry assistant has gone home and she's accidentally left the air conditioning on and left the lights on. And you can go there and you can switch it off. So you don't then incur the cost and the impact of having that unnecessary utility usage right through the night. So it's proactive prevention of unnecessary utility monitoring. Similarly, for residents, we're able to set temperature thresholds in rooms, and that means we can be more sensitive and more proactive to people's comfort zones. If somebody's cold, they may be non-verbal, they might not be able to use a call bell, but we'll know about it earlier. We can go and check on that resident. And similarly, if somebody's too warm, we can go and open the window. We don't have to rely on residents communicating that to us. Waste and recycling is a big one. Again, reducing waste that goes to landfill. We have a zero waste to landfill policy. Nothing goes to landfill at all. We recycle, upcycle, and reuse everything that comes from the care home. So obviously battery waste oils, food waste, composting, and compacting hazardous waste. And then for environmental management, what that means is us having a policy and a plan as to how we operate on a day-to-day basis for all of our usual functions within the care home and all of our team members understanding that. So we're able to outline and demonstrate that we understand the impact of our business and how we can address that. So moving on to the next slide, Laurie. I just want to talk you through where our journey began. So in 2020, we started, and I would like to say it started because I decided it was a good idea, but I'd be lying. We started because our team members told us in our employee engagement survey that they wanted to see us as an organisation do better. And at the time, we didn't really have we didn't do anything particular around sustainability, the odd little bit of recycling and a bit of battery recycling, but nothing major. And we weren't sure where to start, but we decided that we would start by engaging with the Green Mark organisation. And as Vic mentioned, we're level 3 now, but they've got 3 levels of accreditation. And we started with level 1. And level 1 effectively is a benchmarking exercise. It helped us to understand where we were, which was at the beginning, but it also helped us to look at all the different areas of improving sustainability within the business, understand where we were at that point in time, and then identify what small changes we could do within each of those areas to be a bit better. And so we started to make those small changes and created our first environmental policy for the group. Moving forward into 2021, we also created a Green Committee, and Green Champions has been alluded to on the call. I cannot stress to everybody on the call enough how essentially important it is to have people that are motivated and engaged and passionate about sustainability driving the agenda. We always say at Oakland Care, the executive team, they're not the ones that's driving sustainability, and they're not the ones that have done all of the work that's behind our achievements. The Green Committee and the Green Champions are the doers, they're the idea makers, they are the motivation spreaders, and the executive team are effectively the funders, the enablers by giving them the time to do it, and the promoters. And that's how we work it. Because if we delivered a sustainability strategy that was created in an office using various pieces of research or consultants and simply disseminated it out to the care homes, it just wouldn't happen. We wouldn't have the level of buy-in and engagement that we already do now. So 2021, we had the Green Committee, and we started that off with one champion in every home and a couple from the head office function. I've now got over 55 people in the Green Committee. We achieved Green Mark Level 2, so that was demonstrating that we had made the changes that we had pledged to deliver when we finished Green Mark Level 1. And we became the first care home group to be certified as carbon neutral. And that meant that we engaged with Carbon Neutral Britain, and they helped us to assess our carbon footprint, work out what our emissions were, and then we funded to offset that. Offsetting is costly, and it's not a solution. But I would rather do it in the interim while we get to net zero than not do it at all. But it's not the be all and end all of what you need to do. We also began to have all of our real estate assessed for BREEAM accreditation, and this was looking at the construction techniques and materials used within the buildings to make them environmentally sustainable. And so now all of our homes have got those BREEAM assessments, and we have identified things that we can do with the environment in order to improve those ratings. We also ran our first Oakland Care Green Day. We have a very big focus on giving back to the local community, and we run lots of different volunteering days. But in 2021, we run our first Green Day, where every single care home and the head office went out and did some form of local time back for sustainable projects that would help the local environment. So moving forward, Larry, onto the next slide, takes you to 2022. We moved on from Green Mark Level 2 to Green Mark Level 3 and became ambassadors for that organisation. That means that we can help support other organisations, and we have done that. We've run sustainability forums for local businesses and also for our supply chain. And many of the contractors that we have commissioned in the supply chain are now following the three years of development with Green Mark to become Green Mark accredited too. We maintained that carbon neutrality. We extended our environmental management policy to give us a full system of work. And our Green Day expanded and became a greener month because we ran a series of different volunteering events all the way over to the month of September. We also implemented sustainability training for all team members. And this was quite a difficult one because we all know how many training courses there are for people that work in the care environment. And so adding more training needs to team members wasn't really something that we relished. But what we did is added it into our face-to-face induction. So it was a very practically focused learning program. And it helps the team members that join us to understand our values and our aspirations for sustainability. We also embedded it into our interviewing and recruitment process so that we make sure that people who are looking to join us are of the right, have a right aligned values to us on the environment before they come and work as part of our team. We also added it to become one of our core values. It also has a dedicated section in the business plan, and actually we're about to launch in the next month or two our full-scale plan for achieving net zero. And we also present updates on this to the board and shareholders monthly, but more importantly, we share that information with our relatives and residents. We also enhanced our branding, and we have a trademark on Greener Care and the Greener Care choice. So that was something we put into place back in 2022. More recently, on the next slide, Laurie, in 2023, we've been working really hard towards our 15 sustainability goals. The Sustainability Green Committee is now doubled in size. We've planted over 1,100 trees in 2023, and we should be planting in excess of 1,500 throughout the course of this year. As Vic mentioned, we were very proud to have picked up the Gold Award for Sustainability at the Green World Awards. And we are working to maintain our level 3 accreditation each year and working towards ISO 14001. It is important when you look at accreditations, there are a lot on the market, and certainly Laurie and I are working together on a different project with the Sustainability Alliance to try to create a guide to accreditations so that it will help people to identify which accreditation might be most suited to them. But to start small and start easy, like we did with the Green Mark Level 1, and start to build on that as you work through. Our Maplewood Court in Maidstone flagship wildlife garden opened in 2023. As I say, all of the homes have now got those. And we also have that outdoor space dedicated to biodiversity. We have just gained planning permission, and our first build is now in place for our first net zero care home. So this will be our first eco care home, and it will be entirely gasless using solar and air source heat pumps. On the next slide, I've just outlined our 15 goals and ambitions, which I'm not going to run through, but you can find them on our website. I suppose the most key developments from that are the increase in staff time to local communities. That is funded through our labour costs. It's not volunteer and on behalf of the staff, they are paid, but they volunteer to do it within their working time. It does very much improve team engagement, there's no doubt about that. We actually ran a survey, our employee engagement survey, at the back end of last year, and over 85% of staff who responded, and our participation rate in the survey was 89%. Over 85% of those staff said that the work that we do on sustainability at Oakland Care is extremely important to them as individuals. So we absolutely want to make sure that we continue on that journey with them. On the next slide, there are some pointers in our 15-point plan around delivery miles. We're looking to reduce that by a further 50% by the end of 2024 compared to 21. Our clinical waste is already reduced by over a third and should be down to 50% compared to 2022. We will be almost eradicating all plastic waste and chemicals by the end of this year. We'll be continuing to use zero hazardous properties chemicals, only FSC certified timber, maintaining carbon neutrality, building that first gasless care home, and further reducing our paper usage by 50% by the end of 2024. On the next slide, Laurie, it's actually a video. I don't know if you can press that and then let me know when it's finished playing. Laurie?
Yeah, I think it's just playing now. Sorry, I'll let you know when it's finished.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
that's finished, Joanne, you can carry on.
Okay, perfect. If you can just flick over to the last slide and again put all the bullet points on. So in summary, to be truly sustainable, my biggest points would be that the people, i.e. your team members and your residents, are absolutely the greatest asset. Not everything costs a lot of money, and don't let that be a prohibitor to you making a start and trying to make changes. Sustainability needs to be at the centre of what you do and how you do it day in, day out. It's not a project. It can't be an add-on. It's not a work stream or a task group. It is part of how your organisation needs to operate. And therefore, it should be part of your core values, your business plan. You must set targets and report against them so that you can let your people and your stakeholders keep you accountable and on track. And so in essence, let's say it's not a project for us, it's a social movement. And absolutely, I would say it's focus on the practical things. We are always happy to provide any support and guidance to any other providers, be it care homes or dom care, through the team that we've got. If anybody wants to contact us offline, we've been more than happy to support.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Joanne, and thanks, Laurie, for sharing the slides. And I understand from colleagues at CMM that those slides are going to be shared more broadly so people can have a chance to look through all that fabulous information that you had as part of that. So thanks for that. We've got quite a lot of questions, unsurprisingly, in the chat. So I'm just going to try and pick out a few. And I think you started some of this, Joanne, in your presentation, but there's a couple of questions about the difference between carbon neutral and net zero. So some specific questions about how do you budget in relation to offsets, how does carbon offsetting work, and that and how you end up with a net zero position of nothing going to landfill, etc. So I mean, a little bit more digging into that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So the carbon neutrality and offsetting is very much almost a desktop process. There are lots of organisations out there that will help you to calculate your carbon footprint. Say Carbon Trust has been mentioned, and we work with Carbon Neutral Britain. We do look at all of those scoped emissions that were mentioned earlier in the call, and then we are able to fund an offsetting project to offset those emissions. So obviously, the more homes we have, the more that costs us each year. But it is built into the business plan. It's something that our investors are supportive of, and it's something that we feel is important to do until we get to the point of net zero. Net zero is obviously where we're not even making those emissions in the first place. And so that is something that will come in time once our real estate has developed and say building these net zero cashless homes, and really starting to move away from doing things in the way we do now. But for many of the people on the call today, net zero will be an incredibly tough aspiration when people have got some quite aged stock and real estate that they're working with. So that is going to present a challenge to the sector. Waste is a really important one. I say all of the waste is compacted and treated, and nothing goes to landfill. We find uses for everything. So even things like newspapers, which we have much lower numbers of than we had about 2 years ago. Before they even go to recycling, we find more uses for them. So the newspapers will go to the local veterinary practice. The veterinary practice use them in the kennels, and then the veterinary practice will then send them for recycling. So we try to find multiple usages for things before things even go to the recycling stage. But zero waste to landfill is critical for us, and has made such a huge difference in reducing our carbon footprint.
Okay, great.
We're happy again if anybody wants to contact us online to find out more about the waste management strategy in detail. I'm more than happy to put people in touch with one of our team.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. So I was just thinking, Elaine and Lorna, there's some questions in the chat which are particularly around the whole issue of sort of material usage. You picked up a little bit on the question somebody had raised about uniforms, for example, and plastic within uniforms. But there's also some questions about things like chairs, and presumably that sits for other sort of hard furnishings, etc. So in the NHS context, I mean, how is that being approached? And is that a sort of, you know, new replace? Is it sort of new for old replacement, or is there are there sort of capital programs that are looking to systematically remove plastic-based furnishings, etc., from hospitals and, you know, GP surgeries, etc.? Oh, you're on mute, Elaine.
There's not a intentional replacement. It's as and when things are replaced, people are looking for alternatives to the very plastic rich and frankly chemical emitting materials that we've got. Now we understand that we wanted to have chairs, for example, that were fire retardant and were easy wipe down. But we're now pushing manufacturers to give us alternatives to some of those plastics that they've used in the past. You and I will have gone into buildings where you can almost smell a new building, and the materials and the flooring, you know, these we would now look at and say these are sick buildings because of the chemicals that are coming out of even the vinyls on the floor. So I am working with Healthcare Without Harm, looking at how we can provide greener maternity units, for example, where we're not using plastics and encouraging people not to use plastics with their babies and children at home. So I think the world is changing. The manufacturers need to catch up with that. There are regulations about what you have to use in healthcare buildings and the same in care facilities. But we now need to demand the manufacturers give us alternatives to the ones they've given us up until now.
Okay. And I mean, this is probably a kind of, we've touched on a little bit with chemical issues, but there's a food question. And Joanne, you may have some thoughts on this too. So the question is really about, you know, you can utilize, excuse me, sorry, you can utilize organic food, and, you know, that has, you know, clearly lots of benefits in terms of nutrients, but also water usage and things. But the price makes it out of reach for many organizations. Thoughts about how do we do that? Is that something again that's been thought about in the context of the whole NHS estate? Anybody? Lorna, did you want to pick that up?
I think on the pricing, I totally understand the comment regarding, say, organic food pricing, because it is substantially more expensive. One of the things that I'm spent a bit of time looking at is learning from the hospitality sector. So rather than thinking just about the price of your goods coming in, think about the waste process. There's a fantastic website called Guardians of Grub, which is hospitality sector driven, and looking at where is the wastage happening, so that you basically monitor your waste and you split your bins into what's coming off your plates, what's being spoiled, and then you can actually assess how to improve your processes, which overall drives the costs down. So it isn't just about the costs coming in of your ingredients. So that I think it's a really good example of it's, you know, we can learn from lots of different sectors actually, and we need to really cast our nets quite wide.
If I could just,
sorry,
sorry,
yes,
if I just come in, because I think we do get caught up in things like the cost of organics, where we miss some of the obvious things like the carbon footprint of the production of red meats and dairy products. So yeah, even if we could reduce some of those, whether those are organic or not, we'll be having a beneficial impact on the environment. So for example, in some hospitals, we now have meat-free Mondays, we have a lot more vegetarian alternatives, but there is a deliberate move, not actually based on cost, but based on environmental impact. So reducing red meat, reducing the use of dairy, both have a positive impact.
Yeah, good point.
And there's a kind of elephant in the room conversation, question about, you know, is social care being funded in the same way to address the sustainable agenda as the NHS? It would be interesting just to get a little reflection. I know we talked about this when we met beforehand about the sort of mandatory nature of the impact of this in the health sector versus the Joanne's perspective, which, whilst recognising that regulatory changes are on the way, is largely a values and driven by customer demand, etc. So a sort of, so I just wondered if just to reflect a little bit on how where we're going to land, I guess, in that sort of mandatory versus self-driven agenda.
Yeah, I mean, there's been money invested for sure, but that was a public sector decarbonisation scheme. So for all of public sector, that was a huge amount, £635 million available to bid into. 329 million of that went to 30 healthcare facilities, fundamentally to look at their energy and efficiency parts of the environment. So that reduced the carbon emissions from that part of the NHS by over 1 million tonnes of carbon. So it was effective, but those are very costly things. So, you know, hats off to Joanne and her team for the great work that they've done in Oakland Care, because that has to be funded and you have to find the money somewhere to do some of that work. So there is a differential. Most healthcare trusts now are having to find that money themselves. They're already trying to reduce their costs. So we're trying to tie the things together and say, these things now, as part of my research, Vic, is they make sense. They make an improvement to the way we deliver and provide healthcare. They reduce costs, and hey, even better, they also impact on the environment. So if you can tick more than one of those boxes, we're in the right space.
Joanne, did you have a reflection on whether you would be welcoming a more mandatory approach plus funding versus the way you've taken things forward? I'm not sure if you're still there, Joanne, are you? We can't hear you if you're... Ah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I think I got muted by somebody. So yes, I don't think so, because for me, it's about changing people's attitudes and behaviours. And I don't think you can do that with a stick. You know, I think this is about authentic leadership and creating good cultures in care. And that, firstly, for me, that's not all about money. You know, there are things that do require some investment, such as, you know, the new net zero care home that we're building. You know, that is going to cost more money than if I'd built a gas building. But a lot of what we do doesn't cost a lot of money and can make a big difference.
Okay, great. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just have an opportunity to invite each of the speakers just to kind of leave us with one thought about what they, you know, what they hope people have been able to kind of take away from the session today. So Laurie, I'm going to start off with you.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to reiterate really how it's been interesting to hear from all of the speakers today about that engagement with all of the stakeholders in your organisation, and actually how much how I think people are often surprised by how much motivation there is and how much support there is for these different measures and how much of a difference that can make. I think it's interesting, the discussion about whether a mandatory approach, a funded mandatory approach, would be sort of a better driver. But I think that motivating your staff, and you know, there's a lot of quick wins and things that you can put in place with no investment that can actually save you money, which you can then begin to reinvest as well. I think we definitely need to campaign for more capital funding that is available for the social care sector, like Elaine mentioned, there is a public sector decarbonisation scheme, there's a social housing decarbonisation scheme, and a lot of privately run care homes can't access either of those massive funding pots. I think that would be extremely helpful, but I don't think that organisations should feel paralysed because they don't have access to that.
Great, thank you. Elaine?
Yes, I think we're encouraging you not to reinvent the wheel. Lorna and I have been working together for some time now, and it's really helpful to learn from other sectors. You heard about hospitality, you know, we look outside just healthcare. And I would say just start somewhere. I love Joanne's starting a movement. We feel part of a movement, and just starting somewhere, doing even small things, actually engage staff and make a difference.
Brilliant. Lorna?
I just would like to reflect that Joanne was doing all that through COVID. And as a care home provider at that point, hats off to you to actually be doing that and managing COVID. Credit where credit's due. I think reflecting on the sort of the green agenda, I think it is both about individual and systemic change. I think it needs all of us, and I think it needs being pushed and pulled from the directions in order to get the change and the progress that they want. But I would also echo Elaine's, it's all about the action. It's starting now, and not to fearful, and give credit to actually the stuff that you do, because in many homes I talk to are actually already doing stuff, but they don't label it green, or they don't label it as a carbon reduction, but they are doing stuff.
Brilliant. And finally to you, Joanne.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so just echoing what the other speakers have just said, a starting point is find your people. Find the people that work within your homes and your organisation who have got the passion, and let them start the movement for you and with you. You know, I hear all too often, if I could tell you, I've got less fingers and toes than the amount of CEOs that I've spoken to who tell me that they've just given the agenda of sustainability to the CFO, and I said, well, why did you do that? Or just because it sits better with them? Well, why? Is he interested in it? No. Well, why have you given it him then? You know, you've got to find the right people in your organisation, no matter what the level of the person. It's not about them having the technical expertise always, but find the people with the passion.
Brilliant. All right, well, what a great note to end on. Apologies, we've got a minute or two over time, but fascinating discussion. Thank you to our speakers, to Laurie, to Elaine, to Lorna, and to Joanne, and huge thanks as ever to Lisa and CMM for the work that they do to get these together, and the support of Synchro is very much valued too. Thank you all, and we'll send out information after this event. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.